So welcome everyone to 440 Gallery Artists Talk. Today we're delighted to be here to talk about Joy Makon's show, Near and Far. And the show in the project space is called Echoes of Berlin with Ellen Chuse, Susan Greenstein, and Leigh Blanchard. So without further ado, let's start looking at our crew hard at work. And
you're okay, Karen. Yeah.
Joy. It's nice to take note of how the pieces are arranged in the space, and also it's a nice time to see about scale. And maybe noticing things might look a little different as you see them side by side than when we see the images individually in just a moment. So as always, we're going to be asking the artists questions, and I'd like you, audience members, to reserve your questions till after I've asked the questions, and we'll have some time where you can unmute and ask, or you can type into the chat if you want to have a way to think about it along the way. I'll ask everybody to stay muted just because it helps to avoid interference. And what a lovely reception. Get to see how intently our viewers are studying the work. And again, look at the idea of the scale. There's a lot to see in this work. And then let's take a look at Joy's images. If you have the chance, please visit them in person, because it's a whole other experience. But this does give you an idea of how wonderful this work is. So Joy, congratulations on a beautiful show. The work in this show is stunning. The title Near and Far is interesting because it can function for me in several ways. And I'm just curious about how you think of near and far. And if you can just talk about how near and far relates to this body of work.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, everybody. Happy Sunday. Near and far to me is up close and personal, and it's also what I see in the distance. So in each image, there is something up close to you in your face, and there's also the distance of space or the landscape how things move through the composition. That's where the title kind of comes from. It also kind of refers to things that are happening now and things that might be happening in the future. I see that in a lot of the images that I've chosen. There's a little bit of both places at once. So there's a little bit of an ambiguity with that sometimes. And again, it's after spatial effects of shape, form, and atmosphere that helped me come up with that title.
Really beautiful. So our viewers are often really taken with the magic of this work, and some may be curious about how they come about without revealing any secrets. Can you talk about your approach to painting in watercolor?
Sure. There aren't too many secrets, and watercolor is often very magical. I take a very traditional approach to representational painting when I use watercolor. Accurate drawing and rendering of the subject is important to me, and I spend a lot of time on that to make sure that it is accurate. And I generally work from my own photographs that I view on a large scale monitor while I'm working. And I never paint exactly what I see, but I do make decisions about what to include in each painting as I'm working on it. After I've been studying the painting as a photograph, as I've been studying the photograph, I then begin drawing freehand on the paper, and I spend a lot of time doing that. But by that stage, I've given it a lot of thought. I've given a lot of thought to what goes into the composition. And I also do come up with a bit of a strategy as to how I'm going to paint this, because every painting is a little different, obviously. I think about what will I start with first? And often it is the sky, because the sky is a big background in an example here. I think about what is the whitest part of the painting, and the white always represents the white of the paper that I'm using. I think about where the darkest is going to go also, and how they contrast with each other. I need to think about sometimes, how will I protect that white of the paper? Do I need to take steps using materials to protect it, or can I paint very carefully around it and leave the paper white? I think that's often a problem that's very unique to watercolor, is preserving the white of the image. And then I think about, how will I actually render the painting? Where do I put the details? What areas can I make more ambiguous and more mysterious? And I think that all adds up to what goes on in each image.
Yeah, looking at this piece, how you manage the white so masterfully is amazing. I mean, I don't even have a question. I think it's magic.
Well, it was really about the light, and I did paint the sky first. The sky is actually, I poured it. There's no brushes involved with it. So I did that in my basement, and very carefully. And it's a bit of luck, because when watercolor dries, if you've ever used watercolor, you're never quite sure what you're going to end up with at the end. I ended up with a lot of cobalt blue paint, excuse me, on the floor in the basement when I did that. It's also part of the story of this, that the detailed water in the foreground, and then how smooth it became in the background. How was I going to keep that? Really conscious decisions of every mark that I made on the paper with that. And it's watercolors a lot. We talk about happy accidents. I think Ellen had a term for happy accidents you learned in Berlin, you'll talk about. But there are a lot of happy accidents in watercolor, and I think you embrace them. They're not going to go away. Sometimes I even try and force them. I'm never quite sure exactly, what's going to happen when an area dries. What will it look like? Can I live with what's there, or do I have to take other steps to do something different? Part of the way I paint is I also remove watercolor. I remove the paint, and that's part of the technique that I use everywhere, all over the place. And that gives a different effect to kind of things too, just removing the paint that's gone down on the paper. You know, thin lines, sometimes like here, some of the thin lines were removed, and it gives you a kind of special effect on that. And the other thing is with watercolor, there's a lot of hurry up and wait with it. So you hurry up and paint while a lot of the paint is wet. And then it's also hurry up and wait until the paint is absolutely dry before you go on to the next step. And sometimes for me, that means putting it away for the day and coming back the next day where I know that the paper is going to be really 100% dry in order to proceed with the next step on that. So that all kind of adds up into what goes on in each image with that.
Thank you, Joy. Let's talk about subject matter. I believe in this group of paintings, there's kind of an intimacy with the neighborhood of Park Slope, Brooklyn, even though the subject matter is actually quite varied. What draws you to work with a subject?
Well, I think, you know, these paintings were done over the time period since my last show at 440. So it's been a little over 2 years that I worked on these paintings. And it really became more and more important to me just to seek out images that were incredibly beautiful. This was my response to how awful things have been in the world, on both challenging on a personal level and challenging on just a community level. Every day waking up and hearing some kind of awful news, this was my response to how to cope with that. And I think a lot of us as artists, we could probably relate to that. We can dive into what we do and love and have it block out certain things, but I couldn't find images that were sweet enough. I couldn't find things that were too sweet. In some cases, I even made them sweeter and prettier, and really kind of tried to emphasize the beauty that I saw walking around in my neighborhood for the most part. It was there. I just had, it was easy to find in a lot of cases. I just had to see it and look at it and take it in, and then make it into a piece of artwork. I think it really just continues to help me get through this time period. What can I say?
Beautiful. This, as we can see, is an impressive body of work. And I heard you say that they came about over 2 years. And I'm wondering what we can look forward to as far as new work. Is there already more work in progress, and are there several going at once, or how does that work?
I tend to work on one piece at a time, and these pieces can take me anywhere from 3, 4, or 5 weeks to do. I don't rush them. I spend the time to do them to the point where either I can't stand it anymore, it's got to be finished, or I'll spend a little bit more time just to make it, you know, to the point where I'm happy with it. So I do, if I do a piece a month, I think that's great. I've currently started a new piece. It's another doorway from Park Slope. And I've spent the past week drawing it out. I'm probably going to start doing some early painting on it in a day or two. And, we'll see where it goes from there.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure there will be more questions from people who have joined us today. But right now, I'm going to move to Echoes of Berlin. We're going to begin with Leigh Blanchard, and let's take a look at her work. This is an image of her piece as it hung in Berlin. And this is a more standalone image of it. And then there's a related piece that wasn't in Berlin, but that is a more kind of sculpturally mounted piece that she'll talk about. So Leigh, bravo on showing here in the project space as well as in Berlin. Let's start with the Berlin effect. Did showing Berlin give you any different perspective about this work or about how you might approach work in the future?
Yeah, I think showing in Berlin just and showing these pieces or that first piece that you showed particularly, I think it gave me a greater appreciation for like the impact that an image has outside of its body of work. I feel like the past couple years have been really a focus on creating these bodies of work that have a conversation with one another. And I think seeing the work in a different gallery setting, in a different country, um, with all the other artists of 440 Gallery, I think was just really rewarding and gave me a new perspective. And then just being in Berlin as well, I helped with the install and just that whole process was very fascinating to, you know, be in a different gallery, hang a different way. It wasn't as familiar to all of us. Visiting the museums there, speaking with the German artists there at AP Contemporary, I think the whole thing was just really rewarding for me and I think for everyone. And yeah, it was just great to speak with other people with different backgrounds and perspectives. And I think I'm, looking forward to see kind of how that impacts the next completed series. But yeah, just trying to keep an open mind and just move forward with all that great opportunity that we just had.
Thanks, Leigh. My next question is, I've noticed that your unique way of creating artwork is integral to the imagery in both of these pieces. And I don't know if viewers can understand that this one is on fabric and this one is mounted with metal and plexi. Can you tell our viewers about the process that you used for both these pieces?
Of course, yeah. So the initial process is sort of similar, and I think the thing to start with is just the inspiration overall for the series, which was, the process of creating photograms. It's an old photographic process where you put objects on light sensitive paper and then expose them to light, either daylight or in the darkroom itself. And so I use a process called scanography that I find very similar, but just a more contemporary digital kind of version of that. Because what I do is I use a flatbed scanner and then I'll place objects on the scanner and create a really large image so that the light and the file is really big, so it takes a while. The light moves really slowly across the bed of the scanner, and that gives me the opportunity to move those objects around. So it's like kind of part collage, part um, it's very spontaneous. You really never know what you're going to get until the image pops up on my screen once the scanner's done. And I was really inspired by the subject matter as well. So not just the kind of playful quality of photograms, but the subject matter, which was typically, back in the day, a lot of these photographers were like scientists and they were experimenting. They were finding objects around them in the studio. They were using leaves, they were using their own hands, and placing them on the light sensitive paper and exposing it to light. So I tried to incorporate some of that, um, things that I just found around me, things that I found out in the street, things, my hands. If you see the image before, you can sort of make out that there's my hands in the piece. And then as well as I would cut up prints of old photograms and use those kind of as a collage on the bed of the scanner as well. So it was all just a big fun experiment, kind of trying to keep that spontaneity and playfulness. And then when it comes to the process of displaying the works, I kind of wanted to keep that playful and experimental as well. And I'm always interested in pushing the boundaries of photography and what a photograph can look like. So for this piece that you're seeing, it's printed on fabric, so it has some movement to it. And I really think that kind of plays well with the sharp lines you see that the scanner creates. And then the other piece has more of a sculptural quality, as Karen was saying. I made sure to kind of remove this object that I created out of its background, and then it's front and back mounted, so it kind of pops out of the wall a little bit. And I even kind of kept this little chip that you see in the top left corner, just to kind of really emphasize the fact that this is an object. You know, at first you might think it's a perfect square, and then you kind of get up closer and you're like, what's going on here? So I kind of wanted to play with that. The fact that these are also objects as well, whether it's fabric or just kind of removing it from the wall a little bit. Yeah, that's the process in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you. That tells us a lot. I love these pieces and find that they're consistently engaging. Is there anything about this series that serves as inspiration for what's coming next for you? Or would you just like to tell us about what your latest art making adventures are?
Yeah, I would say I'm always kind of looking for something new. I feel like I'm in the inspiration stage right now in terms of a recent trip to Berlin and just soaking up other artwork. I have a very exciting trip coming up to Japan, so I'm excited to really just keep my mind open for that. Acquire some maybe materials that I can't get in the US, maybe you know, buy a new lens for my camera that I can play with, just anything new. I'm just sort of in that experimenting phase. Haven't quite secured onto what my next body of work is going to be, so just staying open and waiting for inspiration to hit.
Oh, I can't wait to see. Thank you so much, Leigh.
Yeah, thank you.
And now we'll move on to Ellen Chuse. So let's take a look at Ellen's work. So this is the two pieces that were hanging in Berlin. And then we see, this is one of them, and then the third in the series. So Ellen, congratulations. Your work in the project space is strong and bold. Can you talk about what inspired this series? You may be muted. Wait, I can't, I'm trying to find you. There you are. Yeah, can you unmute?
I'm muted. What do you know? Anyhow, thank you, Karen. Thank you for the introduction. And this series is a continuation of my focus on abstract archetypal forms that began for me about 8 years ago. And with many aspects of my work, it happened accidentally, or maybe it's better to say inadvertently. But once I found myself in this world of dark forms, I felt a very strong sense of place, if that makes sense. And it started out with circular forms that could be read as solid forms or voids. And these dark forms morphed into totems and then back to ovals that for me represented portals. And this new series has slightly different forms. I'm not exactly sure what they are. They feel both vaguely familiar and slightly unidentifiable. And I like that about them. And I guess that's where it came from. I mean, I'm still, every time I try to move away from the dark forms, I come back to them and just trying to find some different ways, different relationships.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
These pieces are particularly inspiring in their use of color, and I'm always impressed with the sense of balance and luminosity you achieve. The color and the composition are really inseparable. Can you speak to your approach to color?
The color, it's true. The color and the forms can't really be separated, and each one informs the other. I'm particularly interested in the emotional resonance of color. I would hope that the viewer will have feelings about the paintings. Those feelings might differ from my feelings or your feelings, but I would like the color and the form to evoke some deep feelings. And, you know, are they ominous? Are they welcoming? Are they meditative? Or are they disruptive? I'm not always sure. In fact, in, you know, friend or foe, when Karen came into my studio, I said to her, I don't know what to title this. I mean, the other two I knew because it was precarious. And it was a time I started those drawings at a time when things like Joy was saying before felt very precarious. And so the title came very easily. But then with this one, it was kind of like, I don't know, are they friendly forms? Are they pulling apart? Are they pulling together? You know, what's happening? And so we said, well, that's the title. So that is the title of that piece. And I still don't know exactly where they're going. The dark forms are not, I think everybody who's probably watching this already knows this, but they're not black. I don't have, in fact, I had to borrow black paint recently from one of my grandchildren because I needed to make a little tiny drawing in black and white. So I thought that was pretty funny. They're layers of Jenkins green and sort of deep, and that creates the impression of black. But depending on which is dominant, it changes the feeling. You get more of the green, you can get more of the blue. And that's just something that I just play with until I find what's working. And whether in the forms or the ground, I'm always layering. And that's part of what gives the paintings the luminosity. And I'm looking for more luminosity. And I'm kind of sorry that we weren't able to put in a better slide of the green piece that was sold in Berlin, because that was the final piece that I did before this show. And you can't really see it in this, but there's a lot of variation and little things peeking out. And that green was kind of a wash that I just threw on there because I had such despair about what was happening. And it was like, oh, wow, look at that. You know, it's like water. It's very, and that brings me to one of the artists that we met in Berlin, and talking about his own work was trying to find the words in English. And he said something about collateral blessings. And it was like, what's a collateral blessing? He was talking about happy accidents. And I just thought, what a beautiful way of talking about happy accidents to say collateral blessings. So I'm holding on to that. And I would hope, you know, I'd like to find more luminosity and more color variation. Some washes maybe. And I work very intuitively, so I often don't understand what I did until after I do it. And I think for me, that's important because I understand the minute I kind of understand something, I don't know how to express this, but it's good for me not to understand and just to work. So
I hear you. I understand that lack of understanding. So that brings me to my next question. Because the show is titled Echoes of Berlin, it would be really nice if you could share with our viewers something about how the recent show at EP Contemporary informed you as an artist.
well, I like Leigh. It was very exciting to see our work in a different space and in relation to one another. And I was also struck by how creatively we organized that show, because when the Berliners came, it was a lot of very small work. And while it was very interesting and very good, it didn't really give me a sense of the work. I mean, once I went to Berlin and I met some of the artists, I had a much better sense of what they were doing. And I thought we did a great job of really sharing the essence of the work that we do. We had great studio visits when we were there, and I was struck by the seriousness of the discussions with artists about their work, about my work. It's the past hangs heavy, and the sense that we got, granted, it's a very small slice of artists in Berlin, is that they're very focused on work having meaning, that it has that the concept behind it is very serious. If that just, I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know what other people who were there felt. I love talking about the work with them because they pointed out things that I wasn't aware of. And just one example, I mean, talk about not being consciously aware of things, even though it was something that I did. Bodo Rutt said, oh, well, of course you're working, you're working, he used the word grid, you're working, there's the way it, I can't think of the words now, that's my problem. But
He said axis before, right? Was that the word?
Thank you, yes. Thank you. It's helpful to have younger friends. Yeah, the axis. And I thought about, but I never, I mean, of course, when I'm drawing, I've made a drawing, I've made several drawings, and I want to kind of see, I mean, I draw everything, I draw and redraw things, because taking something that's small and making it larger, it doesn't always work. And of course, that was something that I do, but I never thought of it as something that I do, if that makes sense. So it was just interesting to have those kinds of conversations with people. And I found it very, it was a great experience. And, I'll see how it impacts my work going forward. I'm not sure yet.
I'll be interested to see. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you.
And now finally we have Susan Greenstein. Beautiful watercolors, although Susan's out of town. So I'm going to ask Joy to comment. I do want to mention that this piece is a collaboration between Susan Greenstein and Robin Roy. And is Robin here by any chance? Because I will ask her to comment on it. I can't see everybody that's here. Robin, unmute if you're here, but otherwise let's hear from Joy. Just curious, Joy, your take on Susan's use of the same medium that you're so intimate with.
Sure. Can we go back to her other paintings?
Whoops.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. It's great to have Susan showing at the same time I am, because, I've been saying that we squeeze our paints out of the same little tubes of paint, and we use similar paper and brushes and things like that. But we have, and we even paint the same subject matter for the most part, but we have different approaches. And while I may spend, 5 weeks on a painting, Susan paints in the moment. She is sitting right there in front of her subject matter and painting it. And at the end of her painting session, however long that may take for her, she's pretty much got her completed painting. I know that she might go home and touch things up and things like that, but pretty much she has painted right on site what she's looking at. And I think that's one of the differences between the two of us. And it comes across in her brush strokes and the immediacy of how she renders something. They're all based on things that she's looking at, and but just it's interesting the different approaches to the medium on this. I think she's got an incredible eye and talent for doing this in the spur of the moment and being surrounded by things that distract her while she's painting and people that come by and talk to her. And I also know that she doesn't draw when she's working. She goes right into paint. you know, where I will spend time drawing everything. So it does come across in our two styles with that. She just has this very lovely way of capturing a place and a time in her pieces. I think it always comes through in her work with that.
I agree. And I love the connection of you both are kind of masterfully managing the white, like you talked about earlier. And like you said, the subject matter and just that luminous quality that lesser watercolorists can lose, that you two both your pieces sing with it, and I'm very impressed.
I think I could not put words in Susan's mouth, but I could say, you know, how much, you know, the love of the medium, there is an immediacy to it that gives you certain effects that you can't get with other materials. And I think she's certainly mastered it. There are times when I want to paint outside, and I often go with her and I sit outside in the same place, and, you know, we come back with very different pieces, because she's actually, frankly, much more experienced at painting on site right there in the moment than I am with that. You know, there's a lot to learn from her. I'm going to put in our chat for that, but she recently posted some paintings that she's doing while she's in Spain, and one she just posted a couple days ago, I just have to say, blew me away. It was just so gorgeous. And it's on Instagram, you'll see it. And just really happy to see that she's there and making use of her time in a really wonderful way there too. So if you can, go on Instagram and take a look at the painting she's just done in Spain with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. I just wanted to mention about this. I've heard Susan talk about this piece, and I wish Robin was here to comment too, but Robin did some of the geometric bits and the linear things, and also did the burning around the edges, gave it to Susan, and she said she looked at it, had no idea what to do, and put it away, and had to really grapple with what Joy just described, this idea of immediacy and looking at what you're doing and not taking it from imagination, except to make the whole composition work. But then once she got into it, she found a way to make it work. And I love this kind of symphony between the two artists. Is really amazing. And this piece was in Germany also. So thank you all artists that are here that spoke. I'm going to stop sharing now and take a look at the chat and see what's been coming up. So Joanne AC says, to everyone, the rippling in the water is incredible. I agree. Fred Bentime says, I like that you made the paddles different colors. Ellen Chuse says, I've heard Joy speak about her process before, but never in this particular way. I'm fascinated by her meticulous planning and the challenges she creates for herself. Ellen, I don't know if there's a question in there or if you just wanted to make that comment.
Just a comment. Yeah.
And Catherine Orrick says, in the painting of the kayakers, the flow of the paint and the sky is very beautiful. The contrast with the detail of the water seems to demonstrate the range of your medium. Is that something you consider when choosing what to paint?
Oh, absolutely. It was very evident in this piece. There was, you know, and I think it was also rather, it told the story. It told the story about the churning water in the foreground and the smoothness in the background. And to me, that represented that it was movement forward. It was also hope. It was all kinds of wonderful things that's waiting for you as you go down the body of water. I mean, so it was very representational that way. And from a painting challenge, that was also like really great fun. I painted the sky first, and the sky was poured I didn't use any brushes or anything, just really just on wet paper and big containers of blue paint that just went on the paper, and I moved the paper around and then went away for a while to see how it was going to dry. You know, I mean, I planned it. I planned where the white area was going to be and all that. But so that was the first step of that painting. And after that, everything else could be done around it, basically, after I was happy with the sky. And I think in a lot of watercolor, in the way that I work, things like the contrast between details and ambiguous areas is very important. That's what makes the painting interesting. Places where there are sharp brush strokes as opposed to things that get soft and kind of meld into wet paint. All those kind of contrasts make the painting interesting. And they're also, it's a challenge to paint, but it's also part of what you do. You know, rarely do objects have a full solid outline to them. There's always edges that are ambiguous or are soft or meld into the background. And I try and put that into the work as I'm working on it with that. We had a wonderful yesterday at the gallery. Ellen was there. I was there. This 10-year-old boy came in, and he was staring at that painting, and he asked me a lot of questions about that painting. He wanted to know how I painted it. What did I do? Why did the water look that way with the sky? He was wonderful, and it was really just fun talking to him. I've been finding a lot of kids are coming in and looking at these kind of things, and I think it has to do with maybe they're realistic topics for them to see, but they know that they're painting. So we talk about, you know, how it gets done, and get to ask them, what do they do? You know, and this boy was telling me how he draws a lot. And he asked me, when did I start drawing? And I said, as a kid, I started as a child, and I begged my parents and they sent me to classes finally, and things like that. But it was just a wonderful kind of experience. Wasn't that great, Ellen, when that boy came in?
It was terrific. And the first question he came and asked you was, how long did it take you to get to be able to paint this? You know, like basically, what was your trajectory? Which I thought was just kind of an amazing question. I didn't even think he was 10. I mean, he was so full of questions. Yes, he really, it was deep.
Yeah.
It was very deep.
He was great.
So if you have questions for any of the artists, yeah, go ahead and unmute and say your question. Go ahead, Joanne.
I think you're muted, Joanne.
Yeah, you're still muted. There you go.
You know, I'm so technical here. Well, first of all, congratulations to everybody. I was there on Thursday, Joy, and a lot of people came in with children, as you said, and it was really nice to hear the adults talking to the children and the children asking questions. So that was really good. Also, I don't know anybody who does skies like you. I don't care if it's cloudy sky, a sunlit sky, but your skies are just absolutely so beautiful. And it's nice it's interesting to hear how you approach different kinds of skies, whether it's a wash or tilting your paper, but you have such control, when you're using water on a piece of paper. So
the sky is usually done first. Often it's the brightest part of the picture, and it might determine how everything else is toned after the sky is done. So that's part of.
And also, just the spatial depth of your work is pretty incredible. So congratulations. Oh, and Ellen, I also, when you have 3 hours shift at the gallery, you really get a close look at things. And so I was just kind of walking around and standing back from your work, and the dark objects, they have a weightiness to them. But also I realized as I was looking at them this past week that there's a lot of movement in them. Like I feel like the two pieces sometimes are separating, and sometimes, as you mentioned, they're coming together. But there's motion in there. I don't know how you do that with those heavy weighted dark spaces, but I really felt a lot of movement when I was looking at them. This may sound silly, but I sort of reminisced about a lava lamp. Like those shapes, they are moving slowly. And there was something about me looking at them last week where I felt like there was some movement in these heavy pieces. So I don't know how you feel about that, but
Well,
that's
no, that's very, I mean, deliberate in the sense that I work with the shapes and I keep changing them until there's a relationship that involves movement.
Mhm.
So even though, of course, they're static and because they're abstract, they're not, you can't say, oh, that's a balloon in the sky. But yes, so whether it's floating, whether it's leaning, and that's what I really, when I first started working with those forms, what I really loved was total ambiguity. Like, is it a form? Is it a space? Where are we? And that sense of where are we and what's happening, that ambiguity, that's something that I really, that interests me.
Mhm.
And so, and I it's just been a thread through my work, but definitely, a lot of my work that with the round forms, that there a lot of verbs, floating, there's a floating gold, floating blue, hover, they suggest movement or activity. So I'm glad you could see that because that's I aim for that.
Yeah. And one other thing I noticed was the background, the space behind. I don't want to call it the background because it's kind of like makes it stable, too stable. But the space behind the darker areas, there's a lot of luminosity in there, and I think more than in the past that I noticed. But it was just, there's a lot to look at. You really have to see them. There's and I don't know who's photographing them now for you, but I think even now today we can see more of that luminosity and the change of colors, the subtle changes, almost like a pearl in an oyster. It's beautiful.
Yes, yeah. No, that is something that I'm putting more attention to or hope to. Yeah, and layering, which started out simply because I had no idea what I was doing. So I'd put down a color and I'd be like, oh, that doesn't work. And then another color. And so the layering became part of the, it creates the atmosphere in which these forms can.
That word atmosphere is good. Yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Catherine, I see you have a hand up. Did you have another question?
Yeah, I wanted to Ellen actually kind of answered it in a way. But it's a comment too about her forms, and that sometimes there is that ambiguity that they could be voids or they could be forms, and I love how that goes back and forth. And I look at them and I think of seeds, like there's something that's germinating, there's something that's going to be happening. They kind of contain a lot of things. So I just wanted to comment about that. And also, we both actually were in Bodo Rott's studio when he came up with that wonderful turn of phrase, collateral blessings, which I think we both were like, oh my God, what a wonderful, interesting way to sum up that thing that happens in the studio that you hadn't planned on, but you're like, oh my God, this is like this. It's kind of like this is what it's all about. So
if only I could make this happen more often.
Exactly. And so that turn of phrase, it's like I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it because I love it.
Well, I'm going to write it down so I can use it.
Yeah, right. Well,
I think that's called plagiarism, but I really like it. I'm going to apply it to all aspects of my life this month.
But what it's interesting what you said about the seeds, because of course my more representational work has always been forms in nature, seeds and pods and trees and leaves. And of course, those gradually became more and more abstract. So, and then, and here we are today, you know. So, yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah.
I'm working on, I'm not sure. I've got some other totems coming. I don't know. I'm not, for somebody who has a show the end of May, I better get working. So.
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask. Questions, comments?
No, there's some things in the chat from Susan. Oh,
Um,
Susan, no, that's something.
Joy says, yes, Susan just texted from Europe asking if the Zoom session is going well. So we miss you, Susan, but bet she's having a good time.
Yes.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about a comment that Leigh had made about the I think I got this right, something about the nature of her work as an object, that how it exists, not just as this something, you know, this visual plane that you're looking at, but it's how it exists in the world, whether it's on fabric or this object that's laminated on aluminum, I think it was. So I'm just curious if that's kind of like an important factor in the way she thinks about her work.
Yeah, I would say it's something I think about a lot. I think it's something that I've considered probably in every piece, whether I choose to you know, go the route of making it look more like an object or not. I think the thing that's interesting about photography compared to other mediums is that there's a inherent sense of like realism to it. I think people look at a photograph and see and trust it. And so I kind of like to really consider that when making work, even though mine's, you know, abstract and doesn't always look like a thing. At the same time, I feel like photography has that inherent, you know, well, how is that? You know, people will ask like, how is that even there? It kind of not thinking the fact that the same kind of creativity can go in and manipulation as painting or anything else. So I definitely like to think about that and sometimes really emphasize the fact that you are looking at something that was created. This isn't, you know, necessarily the truth of what I saw. There's manipulation going on here. So that's something I like to play with. Sometimes making it look more believable and less like an object and more like a photograph, and other times really emphasizing the object part of it. But yeah, thanks. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a digital, like the source of a digital image is so ephemeral, and then to make it on into something that's so solid and, you know, that you can touch and handle is an interesting aspect to give it, you know, like a full circle duality.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with the fabric piece, you know, you can actually just touch it as well, and that's kind of a weird thing to think about with a digital image as well. So it all kind of interesting topics to think about and comment on with photography.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead,
I
Joy.
just added something. Susan just replied to me. I asked her about her piece with Robin. So this is what Susan wrote. If you have the chat there, or, you know, can you read it?
You want me to
Karen?
read it? Sure. Susan just sent me this about her piece with Robin. After we had done several collaborations on individual pieces of each other's, we decided to work on a book. Robin began by creating gold leaf geometric forms. She also burned the paper and melted red wax on the edges. I looked at it for about a month. I couldn't figure my way in. One night, I just jumped in. Once I began the conversation with Robin, everything began to fall into place. Responding to Robin's forms pushed me out of my comfort zone and invited me to work in a different, very exciting way.
Mm.
Thanks, Joy, for receiving that.
I think it's interesting. I want to go back to we're talking about happy accidents, or what did you collateral something.
Collateral blessings.
Collateral blessings. I like that a lot. I recently had a chance for the very first time to actually teach a little demo of watercolor. I've never done that before, and it's very difficult to paint and talk at the same time. But I did talk about happy accidents, and one of the things I hear from a lot of people is how difficult watercolor is. Watercolor is the hardest thing to use, and you can't undo anything, you can't correct anything. And I always say, well, first of all, I don't believe in an eraser. I don't use an eraser. You know, what I work with is what I work with. If something is so badly messed up, then start it over, throw it away, or come back to it. But I always find with watercolor, you know, your confidence has to be gained, but it's you work with everything that happens with it. You can't always control how the water is going to dry. You can't always control how the paint is going to settle into the wet areas, but that's what you have to work with. And my paintings are filled with tons of that. I mean, I always say almost every stroke you make, if you look at it that way, is a mistake. So stop thinking about it as a mistake that you make. You know, every stroke you make is what you work with. And I think that most people who are confident as watercolor artists, like Susan, like me, it's what you work with. And that those are the happy accidents that happen. That's the beauty of when the paint dries in the sky and it forms a certain shape, or the paint dries a funny way on the paper. That's really the beauty that goes into making this a painting that becomes special. So I think it is a very valid thing to work with, and it's a lot of fun. You know, I love the happy accidents that happen with that.
Go ahead, Joanne.
Joy, I also think about when I see your work and the detail, like that you must have quite a relationship with your tools, your brushes. I mean, I look at the Queen Anne's lace and stuff, and I see that line work and stuff, and I think, wow, I just feel like your hand knows what to reach for each thing that you have. It's so, but it would be fun to see your tools laid out on the table, from the teeniest brush, you know, the least amount of hairs in a brush, to the bigger brushes. There's just so much.
Again, when I was teaching this, I was telling my students, you know, those little tiny brushes with 1 or 2 hairs in them, they're the worst. I actually paint with, the bigger the brush, the better the point is in watercolor, you know. Occasionally I need the 2 hairs to create something. But I'm not against using other tools even to create lines. And I actually use a lot of tools that I once used when I was doing hand lettering. So I use speedball metal calligraphy pens, just dip them in the paint, and you get beautiful lines with that. Things like that. But I encourage these students, I said, don't use the little brushes, get the big fat brushes that you can hold really nicely in your hand. And also, and I think I learned this from one of you, but you know, your whole body can make a brush stroke rather than making little tiny marks all the time. And again, I think it's a matter of experience and confidence, but that really does make a difference in how I paint and how I find that in people starting out, when I hear that watercolor is so hard, they're using tiny brushes trying to draw with the paint. And I think it's an interesting contrast with that. I'm also not against I use credit cards to make lines. You know, dip the edge of the plastic credit card in paint and make a line. My fingers are great. You know, whatever kind of works on it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hard to believe that Joyce created those paintings with credit cards.
Those funky edges sometimes, yeah. Think of a smear.
I don't think my credit card painting would come out the same.
Has to be American Express.
There's the problem. So unless there's more questions for our artists, I want to thank our artists today for all they have to say. And I want to mention a few things coming up. So our next show at 440 Gallery is Gail Flannery, Of One Another. And in the project space, we have Fred Bendheim, Robin Roy, and David Stock. So stay tuned for all the juicy details about that. And I know a number of 440 artists are part of the benefit for the Kentler International Drawing Center, and the show of the donated pieces is up, and I saw it yesterday and it's amazing. So if you can get to Kentler, go check that out. Also upcoming are happening right now is the Salon des Refusés at BWAC that some of us are in. And that's sadly people that did not get accepted in the Brooklyn Museum, Brooklyn Artist Show, but quite a few wonderful works at BWAC. And also a number of us are in the Gowanus Open Studio Tour. That's coming up on October 19th and 20th from noon to 6 p.m. Don't miss it. And if you go on Arts Gowanus, you can look up names and see where they're at and plan your visit. Highly recommended. Anybody else have any announcements? If not, I'll say thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, all.